Hello.
Hi, Jeremy.
Hello, hello.
Sorry, I'm a little late. Let's jump right in. Thanks everyone for joining us on the Tuesday, May 14th SIG Multicluster meeting. Mike and Ryan.
Yep, I'm
just-
going to. Nope, I'm not able to share.
There, there you go.
Hope you all can join the screen. I mean, can see the screen. Sorry. My talking point will be quite quick today. So we're making some more cap changes to further define the cluster profile scope. And in that cap, it kind of have a dependency on this renaming the API PR. So I just want to bring that to everyone's attention. And if you have any feedback to this PR, please feel free to go ahead and provide some, because to me it's quite straightforward. The additional paragraph here talk about, I think there was a comment in the original CAP PR that we should provide some alternative suggestion, and I put it that as the cluster API is one of the alternative, but mostly it's pretty trivial PR. That's basically it for me. I will pass it to Ryan. Ryan, are you here to talk a little bit more about the scoping of the cluster profile?
Sure. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, so I after last SIG meeting, I talked to a few community members, and can you hear me? Oh, can you hear me? Oh, okay.
Hear you, but we cannot see if you're sharing or not.
I'm not sharing. I'm not sharing.
I can share. Let me share.
Okay, hold on a second.
Okay, can you see the screen?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So the background is since last time we have had some discussions, and so I talked to a few. Hold on, let me see if I
Recording in progress.
Can you hear me now?
Now we have an echo. Before you didn't have an echo.
Okay. Okay, I think it's good now.
Yep, it's good now.
Okay. Yeah. So I talked to a few community members, and I made actually a few attempts to modify the cap. So here is the latest version. The very, very high level ideas there are like this, because last time we were discussing whether we should support multiple inventories, and at least at that time we didn't have in the cap, there was not a clear definition of what is a inventory. So I talked to a few community members. Here's what we come up with. The inventory, a cluster inventory is basically a group of clusters. We're not going to put too much definitions down there. As long as it's managed by one cluster manager, that is a cluster inventory. And then the relation between cluster inventory and the cluster set is basically cluster set is a special cluster inventory when all the clusters within that cluster inventory observe the namespace sameness, which we had a pretty well defined in our SIG. Yeah, here, right. And then the next question is how are we going to use those? What's the relationship between the cluster profile API and the cluster inventory? Just to make sure, maybe it's obvious, but it's cluster profile API basically means each individual member clusters in cluster inventory, and and the next thing is what's the relationship between the cluster inventory and the cluster. I think I covered that. And could you scroll down? The next thing is how should the API be consumed? We recommend that we create a hub cluster, dedicated hub cluster for these to consume those cluster profile objects. Basically, they are all CRs sitting in a Kubernetes cluster, which we use that as a hub cluster. I think we recommend the hub cluster to be dedicated, but it's not mandatory. I know a lot of practice people share their hub clusters. And then the big question, the one of the reason we have this cap is we had a big discussion on the CRD side that whether it should be a namespace or cluster scope. So here we say that we don't have a strict requirement, but we are making the cluster profile API a namespace scoped object, so that give the user some flexibilities, so that if they want to put those objects into different namespaces, they could use RBAC, namespace-based RBAC, if they used to. However, we have a strong requirement that if a cluster inventory is a cluster set, means all the clusters, all the member cluster or class profile objects observe the namespace sameness. They must be placed in the same namespace. And in addition, we want that namespace to be clearly labeled with the key, a cluster set name, basically the cluster set name. So to differentiate that from any like kind of quote unquote normal cluster inventory, so that we know this is a cluster set. Then the controllers or humans, whoever is consuming it knows it is a you can basically practically you can apply MCS, you can assume some things, and but that means you cannot have finer grain RBAC within a cluster set, because it's already every cluster profile object is already in that namespace. We sadly, as Tim alluded to multiple times, we just don't have this nested namespace mechanism there in Kubernetes to allow that. And last thing is the uniqueness of a cluster profile object. So the yeah, again, this is just the cap that PR people can totally comment on that. Currently, our position is we would like one cluster profile object to representing one member cluster. For example, there's a cluster A in the cluster inventory. We would like there to be only one cluster profile to represent that. It's hard to I admit that it's pretty hard to enforce that, but that's the recommendation. But the stronger requirement is if it is a cluster set, then as we said that two cluster sets, a cluster, all the member clusters inside a cluster set should be in a namespace, so that then we do not want to have one cluster belongs to two different cluster sets, because they have the namespace sameness. Then it's, as far as I know, it's transitive. So that means these two cluster sets technically should share the same namespace sameness. Then it's kind of weird. So we'd recommend you not do that. That's kind of the gist of this cap. I haven't really looked at Corin's questions yet. But yeah, if you have any questions or comments, yeah, please feel free to.
Yeah, I can explain. Thank you, Ryan. I think what you got makes a lot of sense. Though, and my comments are a bunch of picking on, I think, some of the phrasing and definition. For example, for cluster inventory, in my mind, like I was not even sure we needed the cluster inventory. To me, it was like the list of cluster profiles within the namespace was the inventory, so I didn't need an extra definition, but I think that's fine. And what I'm suggesting maybe is like the list of an inventory is just a list of cluster profile within a namespace. And yes, I think we could get away with that and just write that. I think you have something around the cluster manager. That's the part I'm like, maybe not really. I don't know. It's like, I don't care as much about the cluster manager. What I care is like, well, they're all the members inside of a namespace. That's the inventory one should care about. as a unit.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we can allow multiple cluster managers to manage the same cluster inventory. I'm not 100% sure. Initially, I don't think we would like that. But we can discuss or we can see the community.
Right. And that's some of like in the definition. I don't know if I need to go in the definition, and that's why I was like more lax. Is just one of the thing I wanted to see for the inventory is like namespace. I think the namespace part is important because that's the grouping mechanism of cluster is really the namespace, like the namespace in which the cluster profiles are. So I think that was one thing for cluster inventory that I think would be great to have for the definition. The other thing, and I've gone back and forth on that cluster site. I know that was the big topic for last time, and at some point I was like, okay, maybe we force the cluster set, and it seems like there's some pushback. I think the idea now is that a namespace would be 0 or 1 cluster set. So either you don't declare a cluster set for a namespace of cluster profiles, or if you declare a cluster set, all the clusters are of that cluster set, or depending how we say you declare it, or they have to be all of the same. But you can have at most, 1 cluster set within a namespace. There's no mixing of cluster set within the namespace. And I think that's important for consumers of the API because most of them should require sameness and being in the same cluster set, I think. But I guess I could see the use case for like, hey, I don't want any sameness. And in that case, I'm going to not assume anything. And I'm just going to treat them as a bunch of clusters. Just, the JBOD, right, for disks. That would be the same for clusters, I guess. Just a bunch of clusters. That was mainly my comments, I think, in the thing. And there's a bunch of like little details in there around sameness and cluster set. To me, sameness is part of the definition of cluster set, so I'm trying to refer as much to that. So we can put there, but that's it, I think.
Cool. I think the only a little bit thing that we need to discuss or need to finalize, I think, is whether we allow an inventory to be managed by multiple cloud managers, cluster managers. For the inventory definition, if you want to leave that out, that's fine. But we still want to define whether there can be separate things, right? We can say that the inventory is just a list of the cluster. That's fine. But we still want to decide whether we allow multiple cloud or cluster managers to manage the same inventory. What does that mean? I think,
would that be that bad? I mean, would they could label, I mean, they would have permission to step on each other, yes. But they could.
I think the reason for that is we had a big discussion before about name uniqueness. There were back and forth on whether the cluster name would be unique within a cluster manager or between cluster managers. Because within a cluster manager, it's easy, right? You can enforce that. But then between cluster managers, they don't talk to each other. Then becomes, I don't even remember the conclusion. We had back and forth discussion on that. I think that's related. Because if you allow 2 cluster managers to manage the same inventory, then they could give them different names. So same cluster, one would name A, one would name B. What does that mean? I haven't thought. So it's weird stuff. So that's why initially my intuition was just don't do this. It's a can of worm. We don't want to. Mike, I think you have a question. Yeah.
I think we're actually might be okay on that because with kind of like where we've gotten to with like a quote unquote inventory is a collection of cluster profiles within a namespace. The names must be unique within that namespace. I think we're okay. We might need to better define cluster manager versus like a consumer and like if multiple things can write to the status on these objects. I think that's something that we might need to define a little bit better. But I think generally at a high level, like this seems to be in pretty good shape. I know I'm sorry, I owe some additional clarifications to some of the stuff and diagrams that Tim helped put together. But yeah, generally, I think that this is getting to be in really good shape. I'll take a pass through reviewing it later today.
Cool, thanks. Jeremy?
Yeah, I don't know that we need to make rules one way or the other here. I think the best way to, and kind of what we learned through MCS back and forth is like the saying there can only be one cluster manager is maybe not the most constructive statement. Instead, we should just be very strict about the rules. I think we have. I think we just talked about that. Like we say, names must not conflict. That is a hard rule. You can do whatever you want. You can build 5 different cluster managers as long as they play nice together. But I think by focusing on the rules, must play nice together, and defining what playing nice means, we help any implementer of a single cluster manager, but also de-risk the pain of having multiple cluster managers. Or put another way, if you have multiple cluster managers working together and they're honoring all of our rules and there's still a problem, then I think our rules are lacking, and they're probably lacking in the single cluster manager case as well.
Cool, sounds good. And I think Mike is very helpful pointing out, if we are paying attention, he is pointing out every important definitions in the CAP now. Yeah. But Bob, do you have a question, Bobby?
Yeah, I wanted to say that I also agree with Jeremy, and I think one quick thing that we should always put in our into our API or not put into our API is the implementation details. I think this actually goes towards the implementation details. I agree with Jeremy that we should stick with the rules here, and maybe in our reference implementation we want to build one pub manager or whatever. But it shouldn't be restricted in our API to a particular implementation.
Cool, sounds good. I wasn't really have a strong opinion there anyway. Sounds like that's the community consensus. If no objections, I make that change. Cool. So this looks like we are getting close, and I think the previous PR should be pretty straightforward, right? The naming PR, because we kind of need that PR to get merged. Otherwise, these two would conflict.
Yeah, Jeremy said in chat that he'll get a chance to review that and help get the renaming one in.
Yeah, I'll do that later this morning.
Appreciate it.
Oh, sounds good.
Bobby, you still have your hand up. Do you still have a question or? Okay, good.
No, sorry. I'm not used to Zoom.
Okay, I think Ryan, you wrap up that topic, but I think you also have another topic.
Sure. Yeah.
Jeremy, should Ryan go next, or I didn't mean to moderate.
Yeah, feel free to moderate. Yes, next topic.
What's the next topic?
It's you, Ryan.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm just curious because I was looking at the Slack channel. There are lots of questions coming to Slack channel, and seems like they are not very familiar with what's our project, our CAPS, and also, by the way, I seem to see a few new names. At least I'm not familiar with. Maybe we give some time for them to introduce themselves a little bit. Now, in general, I feel like our SIG could use a little bit more volunteer help to get more guidance. I feel like the community need a lot of guidance from our SIG to point them to the solutions, because there are literally like dozens of solutions out there, and but we don't really have a lot of consensus and guidance. So just wondering if there's something that we can do to help build up this community a little bit more. That's kind of the pain point of some of our cloud managers. So a few of us are doing some real cloud manager offerings, and that kind of is the lack of a community has been a pain point for at least for us, I think. So we'd like to see if there's something we can do to build up this community a bit more, either become more active, get more involvement, more people to get involved, or something. Yeah, just think out loud.
So I think one of the things that would help with that, and this kind of leads into the next topic, is right now there's not a strong like conformance program for the MCS API. And I think that that's something that could drive implementations to engage. If we can work on putting together some of the like baselines and start promoting that and use that similar to like what Gateway API is doing to like drive implementations that care about that to be able to be highlighted on the website as conformant with the specification. Right now, there's a lot of different multi-cluster solutions. Some use MCS API, some do some other homebrewed thing that they've created. There's a lot of solutions in this space. And I think that we really need to start like taking a position and like moving some of the stuff that we have forward as a path to like bringing those like various implementations like into a single conversation. I think that's really what's needed is like, yeah, some kind of forcing factor to get folks to engage with the SIG rather than just sitting off in their own projects, because that's also a lot of the questions that come in to the Slack channel is folks are asking about specific projects or implementations, which many of us, if we work on one, may not have familiarity with a few of the other ones. So that's one of the challenges with like helping direct those people to the right resources that would be able to help them out. And I don't know if you have well, I saw Babak first. Then I think Jeremy, I'm sure, has thoughts on.
No, that was actually quite an interesting point, because I wasn't really aware, and I was not involved in SIG Multicluster much in the past anyway. So I'm not fully aware of all the maybe frictions here. But I felt like what Ryan was saying was a little different. He was asking how we can engage those people more so that they can contribute directly to the SIG. And I was just, I used to lead SIG scheduling a few years ago. And during that time that I started the leadership of that SIG, contribution to the SIG went up 7 times. So we had 7 times more contributions in terms of the number of PRs, caps, etc. And what happened there, and I think what made that thing to basically become a lot more interesting were like 2-3 things. One, having more interesting projects. Examples were like we added pod schedule, pod priority and preemption. We added resource coda for pods. We added a very significant performance improvement for the scheduler. So there were a lot of interesting projects that engaged the community more. So having interesting projects, I guess, is one. And with the new development in this area, where we want to add the API for cluster profiles, etc., I think we have that opportunity. The second thing, which is also very important, is to make the community a little bit more friendly and also be a lot more responsive. If I send a PR and the PR gets stuck in a lot of discussions and takes 5 months before it's merged, next time I will probably, even if I may be hesitant because I feel like, oh, it's going to take a ton of time and energy from me. So, just my instinct prevents me from, doing it again. So, I remember that I reviewed like 500 PRs during like a couple of years. So that was also very, very important, to be very responsive to those who want to contribute to us, and also be very timely with our reviews and not be too pedantic. I understand that some certain things like the API, for example, for cluster profile is super sensitive, so we need rounds and rounds of discussions, but not all projects are the same. So we may be able to accept and iterate and improve in a faster cycles. I just wanted to share my own experience.
Yeah, I'll chime in and say yes, yes to both actually, and I actually think building out or really finishing MCS conformance could be a really good place to practice more responsiveness on PRs. And I also want to call out folks who have been jumping in and helping to answer questions in the Slack as a nice change. Like I think right now we have an uptick in SIG contribution around cluster inventory, which is really nice to see. It'd be great if we could channel some of that into wrapping up some of the other stuff. But also, yeah, Bobby, let's leverage this as an opportunity to kind of accelerate throughput, I guess, on this work. And I think maybe we want to have some, to go with the title of this that Ryan, you entered into the notes, but maybe we want some volunteers who are, committing to review things on a certain basis. I think part of it is like, it's great that we're seeing this organic involvement right now, but a little formality helps, just so that, we make sure somebody's like, we'll look at this, whatever this is every few days to make sure nothing's getting through.
That's exactly what I was trying to, but yeah, basically I definitely want to volunteer to help getting this
Awesome.
more active. Yeah.
Awesome. We have a bunch of hands. I think Jack is next.
Yeah, real quick, just sort of speak to Bobby's point. I think more concreteness in the SIG would help draw folks in. And say in cluster lifecycle, there's a bunch of concrete projects that have concrete user communities, and that draws contributions sort of naturally. But on the other hand, the problems that Ryan describes never go away, and in fact, they could get worse if you're like, wow, 10x more stuff going on in the project. It could be 20x more second order side effects for folks aren't getting their questions answered in Slack, because it just becomes overwhelming. So it really is a challenge. I definitely plus one, a little formality, like baby steps formality can help, maybe define a role and a rotation of folks who are just going to commit to spending 2 days answering Slack questions in under 24 hours, or some, we can define what that is, but that can help as a forcing function to improve the perception that we make in the SIG. But I would say, for folks out there running concrete projects that depend on SIG multi-cluster, come up with a donation adoption plan. Like, let's get those projects. That would be my instinct to get folks really interested in SIG multi-cluster, is having it be sponsor actual things that people are using, and not more of a place for canonical abstraction.
Yeah, agree all around. And also on the baby steps to start, I think that's important. I also don't want to make sure that we don't give the impression that if you want to help out, you have to sign up for ongoing commitments and things like that. But yeah, funneling folks from Slack, and we've had some luck with this in the past. Some people came and do demos, but just inviting anyone who's asking questions in Slack to come talk about their use case in this group can also be pretty helpful. We've had some interesting presentations in the past that basically came out of that. No expectation of ongoing commitment, but just share what's happening. I think it also can be really helpful for the work that we're doing here, to make sure we're not just in this group of people who come most weeks and have a specific goal in mind, that we're actually taking into account some other stuff from folks who may not have the regular time commitment or awareness. Corentin?
Yeah, I wanted to speak just from my experience here. I joined fairly recently on the SIG. When I see the question in Slack, the questions are very specific and they're looking for solutions. And I'm not sure the SIG has them. So it's a lot like sharing of experience of open source projects that are already available, or either open source or proprietary. And I don't want to misrepresent the SIG. For example, if I'm talking in there on a particular project or something like that, and I don't know the SIG's recommendations necessarily, or if this sponsoring of project, I feel there's a bunch out there and I just don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I would say don't be afraid of misrepresentation is open. It's public. People can correct you. But also, if the SIG doesn't have answers, which is going to be true a lot of the time. Funnily, in the past, I've just taken the practice of saying, "Come join us on Tuesday and talk about it," because we don't have an answer, but we probably should. And the first step is actually understanding what the problem is, because normally, like the first thing they ask on Slack is maybe not going to be the real problem they have, right? It's like, we're used to this. Like a customer comes and they say, "How do I do X?" And it's really just like they're asking you how to complete the solution that they've come up with, but it's maybe not even the right solution to their problem in the first place. And so having that deeper discussion can really help surface like what are the building blocks we're missing that would make it so that you could have found a solution on your own, versus trying to ask like, I've got 90% there. How do I finish this thing that may or may not be the correct direction?
Does it come down to also having the SIG clarify what it owns and represents and wants to advertise in the direction we're covering, maybe? Or
I mean, I think we've had a few attempts at this in the past. I think like the SIG multicluster README outlines an area. I want to be careful about being too concrete and turning the SIG into just like working group scope, but I guess I'd say just a blanket statement. By all means, everybody at any time, feel free to suggest charter changes if you think it's not good or it's too broad or not broad enough or missing the mark. Because I think like hopefully it's a good grab bucket for all things multi-cluster, but as we've seen in the past, some things naturally end up belonging in other SIGs, right? Like multi-cluster gateway is not a SIG MZ, it's something we've advised on, but it's SIG network. This, I hope, continues to happen. I think when we look at APIs like about MCS cluster inventory, what they all have in common is that they're really about like adding the strictly multi-cluster building blocks. But hopefully we can be a little bit viral in getting other folks to consider multi-cluster in their single cluster APIs.
So can we advertise a little bit more about the projects that really leverage the SIG MC APIs, like for example, the cluster inventory API, the work API, and the about API, and the concept of cluster set? I feel like, yeah, if there are projects that implement those APIs, we should be a little bit more supportive of it. So I got a little bit of clarity from you regarding that, Jeremy. So thank you for that.
Yeah, that goes back to Mike's point about the conformance tests. We really need to be able to say we're confident that these solutions implement the MCS API in a way that's meaningful.
Making ourselves aware of what solutions exist that implement the SIG MC APIs like is going to be helpful in understanding if they are broadly adopted, if there are issues with them, and like just driving that kind of engagement. I think it's really helpful.
Okay, so on that note, anyone who's interested in signing up for a more, regular cadence, checking the Slack, for example, ping me. And maybe we can add something like contacts, or we'll figure out. I think we probably need more discussion, but depending on what areas, maybe we can add a note to README somewhere, something like that, or on the website.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I think we probably need more discussions on that too. I hear a lot of good suggestions around.
Awesome. And I think this probably this whole concept feeds into Jack, your topic, graduation status.
Yeah. So real quick sort of advertisement of intent. John, Hune, and I are volunteering ourselves to drive MCS API to beta from alpha. So we're doing the easy part of the work. All the hard part has been done. years prior. And the working with Laura to try to scope what that looks like. As of right now, the remaining item is end-to-end tests. So the first step is going to be to define what that means. I'm not sure if that's inclusive of conformance tests, but that'd be great if that can happen. Maybe conformance tests follow along quickly after graduation. Maybe that makes more sense from a matriculation standpoint. But yeah, if you want to get involved in graduating, if you have a stake in MCS API, graduation is going to mean something to your project. So definitely reach out to us, let us know, and we'll be checking back in regularly with status of end-to-end tests.
Awesome. Awesome. Yes. This will be very nice to see. And I agree, conformance can probably, I think at one point we would talk about ideally wanting conformance before beta, but frankly, like probably okay to do between beta and GA.
Yeah, it's a better message to graduate at first. I think you're going to have more.
Exactly. Like, and the other thing too is
more tasty carrots.
Otherwise, I think our GA is basically just beta plus 30 days or something like that. And so it feels like we're front loading too much.
Yeah, in previous discussions, one of the ideas of having conformance tests before graduation was to make sure that to measure what the distance between current implementations and what we imagined as being conformant meant, and whether that meant that we should change things in the spec or relax things in the spec. So that was part of the idea of trying to front load the conformance stuff, and also to get meaningful E2E out of it. So that's why we tied them together, E2E and conformance, and pre-graduation, because we know that, for example, GKE, well, I'm not sure what the current situation is, but I don't think GKE fully implements the spec. Submariner doesn't fully implement the spec. I don't think anybody fully implements the spec, so.
Yeah, that's basically my biggest concern, and why I think it would be dangerous in some ways to try to go to beta without like conformance, because yeah, I am willing to put in work on this to like help fix these issues, but like yeah, GKE does not implement the upstream thing. They move the fields that are under spec over to status. I'm not as familiar with like what Submariner does, but like there are divergences in existing implementations that if we just move the existing thing to beta, we're kind of like locked into. Yeah, we need to actively reconcile those differences. Yeah, that's my concern.
Yep. Okay, that's very fair. I'll roll back my previous statement.
Is there a notion? So can we speak to those divergences? Are those divergences a result of stale MCS API involvement, and just like I got to move forward and I don't have MCS API, I can't wait on those definitions? Are they based on? Okay, so it's not based on a purposeful diversion of opinion, which is a thing that happens where you're like, okay, you have your API, go with God, but I have to go this way. It's not that. It's more that. Go ahead.
I'm not aware of that. I'm not aware of any purposeful divergence. I think, to Stephen's point, that may not mean that there isn't any.
Yeah, also on the Submariner side, it's possibly more in the divergence side of things, because it's tied to the availability of virtual IPs, and because Submariner doesn't patch kube proxy, it can't do all the sort of the similar things to what happens in GKE.
Yeah. So I think
so. It seems like considering addressing these before graduation makes sense. So I'm super happy to include those in. We can do that in end-to-end tests in parallel. They're not mutually exclusive. Much of the work of actually building an end-to-end test from scratch is gonna accrue to whatever it ends up testing in the end. So great feedback. So let's gather.
I don't think
the authoritative set of projects that are using MCS API and find out, is there a consensus API we can we can evolve the current MCS API to that points to beta and consensus adoption across those projects.
Yeah, that sounds great, because I don't think there's been purposeful divergence in that, like, the folks who run these things have all been in this room over the like as this is happening. So if there was, we would have said something. That doesn't mean that the accidental divergence doesn't matter. So it might be for good reason that it just wasn't surfaced. So yeah, I think this is great. Let's keep our hand on the throttle.
Sounds good. Appreciate it. And yeah, looking forward to putting in some work to advance this, because that's exciting. It's
Yes.
been a long time coming, and
Has been a little while. Yep. Cool.
Okay, well, Stephen, it might be careful what you ask for. You're in the black book.
And with that, I think that's our agenda today. Unless anyone else. Oh, Ryan, you got a hand.
There's a ask on the chat about the recordings. One of the things that I would like to help is make the recording available a little bit more timely. Is there any?
Yeah. So unfortunately, and this is entirely my fault, the best way to make it more timely, Ryan, I give you full permission to bug me as much as you want. I need to get on this. Unfortunately, we don't currently have a good way to share out that responsibility. So it's my fault. I will get the last couple up as soon as I can. It should get us caught up through earlier this year, and then I'm going to set aside time later this week to catch up on that. But feel free to bug me as much as you want.
Cool. Sounds good.
That being said, I do want to thank Jeremy. I mean, you have been uploading the last few or the previous few meetings more often. So shout out to Jeremy. Thank you for doing that.
I'm happy to. I'm sorry it's taking longer. I'll work on keeping it more frequent until we can eventually have a better system. At some point, I believe there is supposed to be automation coming. I don't know.
That's what I've heard. That is the rumor I have heard.
So I'll check in on that as well. But cool.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks everyone. I'll see you on Slack and on Docs and on GitHub, and then in a couple weeks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.